Thank you to each and every one of you who are joining us live for worship this morning. It's amazing to see your faces here in the Zoom room. And thank you to those of you who are joining us on YouTube. What a blessing to gather together in any way we can. This is a meaningful Sunday for me. This is my first time preaching since October, when I collapsed, for lack of a better word. So I'm going to be reading my sermon and not looking into the screen. So hopefully everything goes okay. Jennifer is going to text me if something goes wrong. But thank you so much for being here. Have you ever been fearful? Have you ever been so fearful that you have to speak just to be comforted and grounded by the sound of your own voice, but you're so filled with terror that nothing you say makes any sense and none of it makes anything any better? That's Peter's experience in the story this morning. And that is probably the most accurate way that I will ever be able to sum up what the last 7 months of my life have been like. There are moments in life. There are moments in life when God chooses to pull back the curtain that separates our ordinary world from God's sacred realm. We call these moments thin spaces. Thin spaces are when the world we understand and the lives we have chosen to live intersect with awe and wonder, mystery and glory, fear and trembling. These are the moments in life when heaven and earth are no longer clearly separated, and you find yourself caught living between the borders of human logic and reason, stuck in the splendor of God's eternal mystery. This is the space of miracles, and it's the space of sheer terror. In short, it's the space in which love ceases to be an abstract idea and it becomes a primary force in our lives. It's those sunrises that don't just mark the start of a new day, but the start of a new, uncertain chapter in your life. It's when a loved one is suddenly taken from us without explanation, in a flash, out of the blue. It's when something you have tried to avoid your entire life just lands right on top of you. And when we are in these spaces, do you know what humans primarily do? Primarily, we tend to miss it. We talk over it. We start lashing out and scrambling around. We become obsessed with our own fear, our own despair, or even in happy circumstances, we become really organized around our own joy, our own celebration. And we just talk and talk and talk and talk, just trying to reclaim some control, trying to deny the reality of what God is revealing to us. That's what Peter's doing throughout the entirety of Mark's gospel. Yeah, Peter and his other friends, James and John, sure, they dropped their nets and followed Jesus as soon as they were asked to do it. Great, good for them. But then Peter seems to spend his entire time as a disciple picking fights with Jesus, telling him he's wrong, denying what he says is true. Just a little earlier in Mark's gospel, Jesus asked the 12, "Who do you say I am?" Peter was the only one to answer. He said, "You are the Messiah." And Jesus said back, "Yeah, don't talk about that." And Jesus taught the disciples that the Messiah, God's chosen one, was to be handed over to the enemy and tortured and killed. And Peter actually chewed Jesus out for saying that. Don't say these things. What's wrong with you? No one's going to follow us if you're saying these terrible things. And for 6 days, that fight continued. And then Jesus took Peter with James and John up to a mountain, and God tried to mediate the argument by pulling back letting Peter and his 2 trusted friends take a peek behind our ordinary world, a peek behind the mask, the costume that was Jesus's body, to see his full glory. In that moment, Jesus no longer looked like the man they had come to know. He had been reshaped. That's what the word transfiguration means. Reshaped, glowing with dazzling light, his clothes pure white. Then 2 spirits appear in front of them. How did they know it was Moses and Elijah? I mean, if we were going to make a movie or a TV show out of this story, we would have to give some visual cues to let the audience know who it is. I mean, we wouldn't know it was Moses unless the person sort of looked like Charlton Heston and had 2 big stone tablets with them. We would have no way of knowing it's Elijah unless he appeared in some kind of fiery chariot with fiery horses. But then, of course, if you're my age or younger, you might just mistake that as a reference to the Hunger Games. Did those 3 men understand who it was they were seeing that day? Or did it take them months or maybe years to figure it out? Jesus enters into conversation with Moses and Elijah. Peter, James, and John are within earshot of a secret divine conversation. What were they talking about? What sacred, secret, heavenly things were being revealed to these ordinary men? We'll never know, because Peter talked right over it. Teacher, it's so good that we are here. Can I make houses for you and your ghost friends? They were terrified. When are humans terrified? When control is taken away from us. When we experience the unexplainable. When certainty is stripped away. And when we are made to feel scared and small and uncertain, we talk. We say things, whether they are true or not, whether they make sense or not, just really trying to make ourselves feel better. And we often miss what God is revealing to us. The psalmist wrote, "The mighty one, God the Lord, speaks and summons the earth from the rising of the sun to the setting. Our God comes and does not keep silence." When God speaks, humans would do well to stay silent and listen. On the way down the mountain, Jesus tells the guys, don't talk about this until after the resurrection. Don't talk about this until you understand what's really going on here. I think that's good advice for all of us. It has been especially great advice for me these last several months. Sit quietly until we have some depth of understanding of what God is revealing. We don't need to talk about things we cannot understand until we have some grasp of them. Almost exactly 7 years ago, I went on a Christian music celebrity cruise with my grandmother and my uncle. My grandmother wanted to meet her hero, gospel singer Sandy Patty, and she also wanted to meet her lifelong celebrity crush, the gospel singer Larnell Harris. And Grandma didn't move very well on her own, so she was never going to be able to go on this cruise by herself. So she called up my Uncle Mike, and she called me, and she invited to pay for us to go with her on this week-long gospel celebrity cruise around the Caribbean. It's one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life to accept that invitation. It was a week filled with laughter and a lifetime's worth of stories. For example, one morning, I wheeled Grandma to the expansive breakfast buffet, and I said, "Okay, Grandma, what would you like for breakfast today? Some eggs?" And she said, "No, no eggs today." And she sat and she thought about it for a moment. And then she said, "I think I would like an omelet." "Grandma," I said gently, "you know there's a very famous phrase about how you can't make an omelet without some eggs and breaking them, right?" It was filled with the story. I'll tell stories about that trip forever. Just ask. Some of the celebrities on the ship were not just gospel singers, they were also televangelists. A former co-host of the 700 Club was there. And every day, these celebrity / theologians would have various offerings on the ship. And one day, my uncle and I noticed there was a men's gathering, and the topic of the conversation was, what will heaven be like? So my uncle made me go. He said, "Grandma's at the slot machines. We don't have anything to do. We should probably go to at least some of these program things." So he made me go. And for nearly 2 hours, we listened to a group of televangelists and gospel singers answer men's questions about what heaven is going to be like. There was one question after another, and astonishingly to me, these theologians in the room had very specific and detailed answers for every single question asked. It was incredible. I mean, I didn't agree with any of their answers. I didn't see things the way they saw them. There are many different ways to read the Bible, and I've been taught in a tradition that says the Bible is meant to help us explore the unknowable mysteries of being human in this world. These gentlemen were from a tradition that taught the Bible can be used to answer any question you will ever ask. You just need to know where to look and how to interpret it. We were not on the same page, but I was really impressed with the speed and the specificity and the certainty they had for every answer they gave. They really seemed to have it all figured out. Until the final question of the day, when this older gentleman was sitting at a table, just his hand gently, kind of lazily raised in the air, and they called on him, and he asked, "What if I mess it up?" And one of the televangelists made a weak attempt to try to pull a little bit more information from the man. He said, "You think you'll mess it up? Like, you think you'll mess up heaven?" And the gentleman said, "Oh yeah, I know I will. My wife tells me all the time, I'm too stubborn." So if heaven is the place where God is in charge and I'm too stubborn to do what I'm told, I'm just going to mess it up. The televangelist didn't miss a beat and offered the weakest answer of the entire morning. He said, "Well, sir, I think when you get there, you'll change your mind." For 7 years now, I have walked around kicking myself for not jumping out of my chair and shouting to that beloved soul in the entire room, "I am an ordained pastor in the United Church of Christ. You cannot possibly mess up heaven by being yourself. Why else would God let you in?" if not to show you you are loved just as you are. The mysteries of God and God's creation are not ours to control. The mysteries of this enchanted universe are not problems or riddles that we have to solve for ourselves. They are enchanting mysteries. They are divine invitations. Invitations to find ways of walking through this world in mutual loving relationship with God and neighbor and ourselves, just as we are. There's a lot happening in the world, friends. Too much to ever fully comprehend. Jesus is willing to teach us how to walk in the way of life, even though we will only ever be able to understand, at the very most, one step at a time. So let's prepare ourselves and prepare one another to enter into the thin space of Lent, to let God's mysteries enchant us, to fall in awe and wonder with the world God created, to finally see ourselves as beloved, to live our lives as God's beloved. Let's prepare to walk together as Jesus instructed his first disciples, starry-eyed and silent, until we can better understand what's really going on behind the scenes. Your Valentine, Reverend Gruhn.